Welcome to the Reversion to the Mean podcast, hosted by Justin Castelli of RLS Wealth Management and Kevin of FerventFinance.com. On Reversion to the Mean, Justin and Kevin will discuss the week's top financial Twitter shares and distill them down to what's necessary and what's noise. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing discussed on this podcast should be considered professional advice. The opinions expressed by the hosts are theirs and theirs only.
Welcome to episode 38 of Reversion to the Mean. It's been about 2 weeks now since Tiger won the 2019 Masters, but I wanted to talk about the gambler who won $1.2 million on Tiger's victory. Apparently, this day trader made an $85,000 bet that Tiger would win the Masters, and I think he got 14-1 odds, which paid out about $1.2 million. But he claimed he had never placed a bet on sports in his life. I kind of find that hard to believe.
I call BS as well. You don't make your first sports bet ever at $85,000 when they talked about his finances a little bit. He had student loan debts and mortgages, and he said he only put the amount down that he could afford to lose. And I'm thinking, take that $85,000 and pay those loans off. And I call BS all the way through on that.
Yeah, this article was pretty weird. Just his whole story is a little weird because he's a day trader. He, had this divine intervention that Tiger was going to win the Masters. So flew to Vegas from, I think, Wisconsin to place this bet. And he had to walk around all of Vegas to try to find someone that would take his $85,000 that he had in a backpack to make the wager. And it was his first sports bet ever. Yeah, I kind of find it hard to believe. And he said, I'm a responsible guy. My background is in finance. I'm going to invest most of it and we're going to grow it. But when he says where he got it, it was like he said he pulled it out of a failed business venture, trading account or something. None of it makes sense to me.
Yeah. This is not the best way to structure a financial plan. And the fact that he's a responsible guy coming from a day trader makes me half laugh. Not that you can't be a successful day trader, because I'm sure there's plenty.
It's all right. You can say it.
But that's not. I wouldn't call that a responsible way to live. So yeah, the sad thing is going to be two things. One, there's going to be other people who think that this is possible and they're going to blow themselves up. And two, he was already talking about if Tiger won a couple more, he would do it, basically do it again. Do I remember that correctly? He said if he wins both of those, which I think he'll do, he'll go to Portrush. I think no doubt he'll win the Grand Slam, then go to Augusta. That's the same feeling that led me to bet on Tiger in the first place. He can just do amazing things. He's going to get overconfident like us men do when it comes to investing, and he's going to lose everything.
And this is total survivorship bias too. You don't know about the other guys who had 50 grand on, Jason Day or any other golfers to win, and they didn't win. But you're hearing about this one random guy from Wisconsin that put probably way too much money that he, more than he could afford on one single bet that he had no control over. But
I like this.
Yeah, it makes a good story.
I liked his wife's response to him doing it. She's basically, I'm not going to be able to stop you from doing it, so you have my blessing. That makes me think that he's done it before. This is not the first time he's done it.
All right. Well, we shouldn't give him any more airtime. Wall Street Journal, Jason Zweig had a piece about Fidelity's index fund bashing. So I guess Fidelity came out with a research piece basically saying, index investing isn't as, all it's cracked up to be, and active investing, can outperform index investing. But then Jason Zweig kind of goes through the details of their quote unquote research that they did. And they did some things with their the portfolio of funds they could select from. So they removed the most expensive funds. They also removed any funds with lower than 3-star ratings from Morningstar. And right away, when you're removing the most expensive funds, those are the funds that are going to perform the worst because they're expensive. The active funds that are expensive perform poorly. And there's just so when you remove those right away, you're giving the active funds, a little bit of an advantage. But Jason Zweig kind of goes on to pick apart the piece by Fidelity. And I saw around Twitter, a lot of people were kind of giving it, kind of a thumbs down with regard to what the information they were putting out there with regard to passive index investing.
Now, if Vanguard would have put out this study, maybe I'd believe it a little bit more. Although most people don't realize Vanguard has a very high percentage of actively managed funds.
But they're pretty cheap.
Funds.
Yeah.
Right. No, yeah, totally. But Fidelity is not a index fund company. They're an active manager. So of course they're going to try to, data mine the numbers to make it look good for them. But one thing I always remembered growing up in the business, people saying that large cap was harder for active to beat, but as you get to the smaller, where you can actually do some research and there's maybe some manager skill that it comes into play, those small cap international emerging market funds, those you can actually get some alpha out of the active managers. But again, the fees eat it all up. So they did mention that the large caps didn't do much better than the indexes. It was the smaller companies and more specialized funds. But at the end of the day, yeah, I'm sure there are consistent active managers that are good, but when you layer on the fees and trying to pick them, it's hard to do. Another thing I think that makes it difficult is when somebody goes into an active fund, maybe it is a good manager, they're not always going to have great years. So the one time they do bad, it's going to be easier to bail because you're thinking, oh, this person lost their magic, let me go somewhere else, and you start chasing around. I think with index fund, once you commit to the index way, there's no reason to chase around because you realize I'm getting what the market's giving. There's no reason to expect anything better. So I started out early in my career, attracted to active funds. The stories all sold me. It sounded like fun. But now as I've matured, I've seen the way and just kind of, for the most part, more move towards more on the passive side. Now, full disclosure, I don't use only passive index ETFs. I use dimensional funds at my firm, but they're pretty daggone close to index just with their tilts built in.
Yeah, what I found funny about this piece is because Jason Zweig usually doesn't put people on blast, but there's this one advisor that he was quoting throughout the article, and this advisor was saying that he could put together a list of good active managers that have had solid performance for decades. And he said anybody can do it; it just takes some work and time and understanding. And then right off the bat, Jason Zweig says, in fact, it takes such a lightning bolt of luck that almost nobody can do it. Only 7% of the funds in the highest quartile of active U.S. stock funds in 2015 were among the top 25% just 3 years later. So no one can do that. This advisor was just claiming he could do it, but in reality, no one can pick, the active managers who are going to perform great into the future.
So you sent in an article about SoFi's ETF disaster, debacle, whatever you want to call it. Lead us into that one.
Yeah, this one pissed me off because you're basically taking SoFi, who I think started with refinancing student loans, and now they came out with their own couple index funds, and you could invest through SoFi, and I think people were just in Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund. Well, then SoFi came out with two of their funds, and they just, without letting anyone know or asking them if they wanted to, they just moved everyone from Vanguard Total Stock Market to their two funds. And what does that do when everyone's got their money in SoFi's, in an after-tax brokerage account? It yields taxable gains for all their clients without their even consideration. Who knows? If these people are in a higher tax bracket, half their gains could get wiped out from doing something like this if they're short-term gains. And they had interviewed one lawyer in the fund who did not want to be named because he thought he might look bad for investing through SoFi. But I like these platforms because they're giving people a cheap way to start investing, and I think that's always a good thing. But then when you kind of do this shady stuff, I think right away you lose credibility to being a good robo advisor or broker or whatever you want to call them in this scenario. But you just lose credibility instantly, and I don't think people are gonna want to invest with you.
So some more of the details. Basically, these people had portfolios that were constructed by SoFi, like basically model portfolios, and they roll out their two. And the thing that's marketing behind it is they're free index funds.
Okay,
but they're only free until 2020. So it's after 2020 they can raise and start having normal fees on it. But it's all a marketing ploy. Is come in, we'll get you in, and they're hoping it's sticky and they don't move and they raise fees and they start making money off of that. But then what they did, to your point, they added those into their model portfolios, taking out the Vanguard. They sent, I think they said it sent notice the day they did it. So there was no opt-out feature that other companies have done in the past that say, okay, we're going to make this change to use our proprietary funds, but you have the opportunity to say no to stay in so you don't have these taxable gains. And one of the troubling things in this is SoFi's defense was, it says SoFi said its actions were in compliance with industry rules, which that's a problem right there that, I don't think they hold themselves out to be fiduciaries because they're not giving technical advice. But at the same time, they should be doing what's best for their clients, not what's best for SoFi. And they're going to make the argument, well, we're putting you in a cheaper fund, but it's a proprietary fund that will eventually have a fee, and you did it without really giving anybody a chance to say yes or no. And the reason it's okay is I'm sure this relationship gives SoFi the discretion to build the portfolio. So, as an advisor, I have discretion. I don't have to technically check with my clients before I place any trades, but for communication purposes, to make sure we're on the same page, I do. I would never make a change without talking it over with somebody so they knew what was going on, and definitely giving them a chance to say, hey, I don't think I want to do that. So definitely not a good look on their part. But I'm sure by now, since this is a couple weeks old, a lot of people have already forgotten about it.
Our next piece is from Nick Maggiulli of Dollars and Data, the money we don't talk about. And I actually got to talk to Nick briefly while we were down in DC a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about something similar where, even though on financial Twitter, we talk about a lot of things that people don't, aren't able to talk about in real life, we're able to talk about them on Twitter, but there's still even further categories within finance that people still don't feel comfortable talking about. And he had some exchanges with some advisors about some of the difficult conversations that they have with clients. And one of the items was, the cost of fertility treatments. How do you handle a client who's unable to have children, so they want to seek fertility treatments, and these fertility treatments cost tens of thousands of dollars, and most cases probably aren't covered by insurance. Like, how do you bridge that gap from like a goal a couple has to like the actual money that it's going to cost and could potentially derail some of their plans? And it just, I think it's just good to, kind of bring this stuff out and start to talk about it, because a lot of people probably have to go through those decisions, and they're not easy ones. So there's no point in hiding those, kind of like discussions from everyone. Like, we should, be able to talk about them, because I'm sure, like, even if you don't think you know anyone that's going through it, somebody is going through it.
And not quite the same parallel, but thinking of tough conversations to have with clients regarding spending. Like the fertility thing would be a hard thing to say, but I think that honestly, I think that's something that you build into the plan, and you figure out what the trade-offs are. That, okay, if we're going to drop 30 grand, then we may have to work longer or save more later to make up for that for your retirement savings. But I can tell you, as a parent, I would spend 30 grand in a heartbeat to have another Roman, Leo, or Silas. So that's tough. But thinking of budgeting, another tough conversation piece is tithing. I can't tell you how many times I've sat down with people that have cash flow issues and they tithe more than they financially should. But that's kind of one of those things where it's hard to say, no, you shouldn't tithe to that level, because that's their belief system. So there's a lot of these things and this is why I think the whole financial advisors are going to go away and be replaced by robo advisors and technology isn't true, because until maybe the robots get smart enough to have emotions, but until you can actually have the emotions and have those conversations about fertility or tithing or whatever it might be, I don't think that you can replace a human being able to build that into a plan. And it all goes back to, I don't know how it was in your house when growing up. Like, we talked a little bit about finances, but not a lot. And I don't know why it is that finance has always been such a taboo subject that no one wants to talk about. I think maybe it's because we live in this bubble of FinTwit and the spin-off blogs and the FIRE movement and everything, and more people are writing about it and being transparent. I think more people are open to talking about it, but I could be wrong. But I've had conversations at soccer practice last week with a friend of ours. One of their boys is on our team, and I was talking to the dad, and we were talking about like planning and different things. And we started diving into numbers, and obviously I wasn't giving any advice, but it was a pretty open conversation about his finances. He has another financial advisor. But it was interesting. I left that thinking that's pretty cool that somebody actually was comfortable enough to talk about finances, because most people wouldn't.
Yeah. And it goes back to, how people, think of money and how that relates to how they think of, of others. So what we tend to do is kind of think of money as a proxy for, status, a person's status. And somehow, like people do with careers too, like people hold MDs and lawyers and things like that, in higher regard. CFPs, of course, because they have, all this education and experience and things like that. And people kind of do the same thing with money. And it's just it's a hard subject, because we know we probably shouldn't do it, but maybe it's intuitive, or I don't know, why, a lot of people do that. And I'm definitely guilty of it too. But then you kind of equate, money with kind of like this lofty expectation. But yeah, it's tough. And, I think the only way we get better at it is if we talk about it.
So Stephen A. Smith in the finance world.
This one's
Ben
funny.
Carlson had a real good post. I think we both, or you shared it. I was getting ready to share it in the Slack feed, but I thought it was great. So just real quick, Ben writes about Susie Orman and Dave Ramsey, comparing to Stephen A. Smith. If you're not familiar with Stephen A. Smith, I've got to imagine most of our listeners are. But if not, he is a sports commentator on ESPN. I personally cannot stand him. He's obnoxious. The parallels you can already see between the other two people that Ben mentions, but he became the highest paid sportscaster on ESPN with a new deal between 8 to 10 million a year. And basically his persona has become the loud, obnoxious person who has hot takes because it draws people's, it's entertaining. It draws people in, and that's kind of his shtick. And so he was talking about Susie Orman and Ben and Dave Ramsey and kind of how they go about doing things. And at the end of it, he had a quote that Susie Orman didn't like very much, but he said that taking personal financial advice from the rich and famous can be hazardous to your wealth because eventually these people can lose touch with reality. Much of what they're now doing is personal finance hot takes to keep things interesting. And Susie said that was the stupidest take she's read or something like that on Twitter. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, she's been in the news so much lately. From back, I think it was the fall of last year, where she was in an interview talking about FIRE and basically saying if you're going to retire early, you need at least $5 million to retire early. And then obviously that blew up because people says she's not in touch with reality. Who's ever going to be able to how is a normal person ever going to be able to save $5 million to retire? And she owns this private island, but at the same time tells people they're not going to be able to retire because they're spending $3 a day on coffee. And like it's just the advice is I think it's just trying to elicit clicks. And I totally agree with Ben on his take here is they're just trying to keep things interesting and people listening and watching and buying the books and kind of just keeping them on the on the news stations and whatnot. But yeah, like some of the things we're gonna get. Everyone in FinTwit, or at least 75% of them, are blocked by Dave Ramsey because if you ever even say, "Oh, you can't get 12% returns from stock mutual funds," then you're going to get blocked. But so I think they're just kind of characters now, is how I think of them, rather than personal advice or financial advisors to the masses. But yeah, it's funny to hear these kind of takes on them.
Well, I'd throw Jim Cramer in the same category.
Oh yeah,
not too much different, just a different angle. I honestly, I think Susie's trying to grasp and try to stay, I don't know, in the news because I feel like her demographic is an older demographic, and I don't think millennials listen to her. So whether that's let's make the millennials mad so they'll read about me and talk about me and I can stay relevant, or I don't know, but I feel like Dave Ramsey has a pretty loyal young base because his is more focused on debt. And while I don't agree with his 12%, I don't necessarily disagree with his debt snowball and his approach to cash and really trying to correct behavior. And the people that are really taking hold of what he has to say have very bad financial behavior, and what they need to do is just go back to the basics and keep it real simple. So I don't have full issues with that. I don't like him because I think he's an arrogant ass, and I think he comes across as I'm better than you, when I think he filed bankruptcy at least once. So like he didn't do everything perfect, and I don't know if that's part of what his story is hey, I messed up and learn from me. But just I feel like he sits up on this pedestal and looks down on people and like you peasants, and that's why I don't like him. I don't think all of his advice is that bad. You get into the investments, different story, but the budgeting and kind of cash type of thing for the people that are really needing it, I think is good. Susie, I think she's just all about the headlines and she's got her persona. But you know what? They have been extremely successful, have built major careers and major empires doing it. I just don't think I would want to be the next either one of them. I know there's people out there who say they want to, but I wouldn't want that role.
Yeah, and I think even though I said some things about Dave Ramsey, but he is helping people get their cash flow under control, pay off student loans, pay off credit cards, and sock some money away from retirement. And if he's doing that for the masses, even though the advice might not be the best advice, as long as you're paying off debt, who really cares how you're going about doing it, right? And as long as you're putting money away and living below your means, who cares this, the exact steps you're going to take. So, if the outcome is good, I guess you kind of have to put up with some of the advice that he gives along the way.
So the next one from Nick Majuli again. I feel like you've written something on this before about. So his is called "The Problem with Most Financial Advice," and
Yeah.
the big takeaway towards the end was talking about how for some it's about making more money, and the problem with advice is we don't talk about that. So I thought it was real good. What you think?
Yeah. This piece took a couple different turns, but one part was just the survivorship bias. Whenever an entrepreneur is getting interviewed, it's because they're successful. Or when someone's getting interviewed about personal finance, it's the person who retired at 35 because they had a software engineering job, or they just saved 80% of their income and things like that. So you're having all the people who either got they had worked extremely hard and probably got lucky along the way, and everything just worked out for them so that they're in a position where they're now giving advice and trying to explain to people, this is how I did it. Well, once you're successful, it's kind of hard to look back and pinpoint the exact things that got you there. Now, obviously, things like increasing your income are probably always going to help when it comes to personal finance, as long as you don't spend, in proportion to how you're increasing your income. But, survivorship bias has a lot to do with, the stories we hear about people who are successful in entrepreneurship and personal finance. And that's just the way it's going to be. Like, no, I don't want to read or listen to an interview with someone who's failed 4 businesses in a row, like, because you don't think you're going to gain anything from it. You probably would, but it's just not how our brains are wired. So I think I don't think that is going to change or needs to change. I just think people need to understand, just because the successful person said they increased their income from doing A, B, and C, that A, B, and C might not be available to everybody. A might have been luck, B might have been extremely hard work, and C might have just been in the right place at the right time. So it's kind of hard for these interviews to assist people with charting their own course exactly. Obviously you're going to have to make it personal for yourself, but I think it raised a good point about you just can't take all these step-by-step processes word for word, because they probably won't work for you exactly how they worked for that person.
Well, I like how he says it's easy to save money when you have a high income.
Yeah.
So you hear people say about they saved X percentage, but if you have a higher income and you can do that, it's a lot easier. And I really did like how he kind of talked about his personal experience and admitted that, hey, I was able to get to this level because I had a high income and I had low expenses. Like, I was fortunate, and there was no magic bullet. I just kind of lucked into it. And I do think luck is a part of it. I also think that sometimes we're able to create some of our own luck, or at least put ourselves to be in that right place at right time because of hard work.
Yeah.
But no doubt that there's always going to be luck that one person gets that somebody else doesn't get. But I thought it was good. And he also alluded to a little bit about kind of like privilege that some of us have. That's something that I've really paid attention to lately. And just kind of as I meet new people over the last year, that there are privileges that Nick kind of highlights too, that, in the last year or so, I didn't realize were really out there. And now I see that, hey, it's not so much, to me, I think it's not so much privilege all the time as it's not having the same obstacles that other people have, which in itself is privilege. But
Yeah.
I just appreciated, and I wanted to shout that out, that he addressed that, because a lot of people won't admit that they maybe have an easier path than somebody else, because it feels like it takes away from your hard work, which it doesn't. It just means that you had a little bit easier, or somebody had a little bit harder. It doesn't make one person better or not. But I just wanted to point that out, because I've had a lot of conversations the last 6 months with peers in the profession about privilege and what that plays in. And a lot of people don't like to talk about it.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And we don't have to go down that avenue tonight. I wanted to highlight it because he brought that to the table, and I had a conversation with somebody the day before just about it. So it was perfect timing. And I just wanted to shout him out for that.
All right. The next piece was from the Humble Dollar, Castles in the Air. You shared this one, Justin. You want to talk about it?
Well, I shared it just because I know that you're still in the housing search. Maybe you've put it on the back burner, but I even think you may have tweeted something today about looking at all houses that are like 3,000 square feet and it's just you and your wife and you don't need that big of a house.
Yeah.
So the piece is just talking about his grandparents having, a 900 square foot house and never had a house over 2,000 square feet, and how things have just kind of changed, and that it seems like millennials are maybe old spirited in the sense that they don't want big homes. So do they hold off on home ownership until they can afford, and people being priced out because the houses are so big? Just kind of talking about the housing landscape and how it's different now than it once was. And I say that as I sit in the basement of my probably bigger house than we need. But we've grown into it. I will say that when we built it, it was just Ange and I, but we knew we were going to be here for a long time. So now all the bedrooms are filled, so that we're using the space, but realistically we could have a smaller house. And sometimes I've thought about, do we downsize and lower the mortgage and have more money, but we like where we're at.
Yeah, I had a little bit of back and forth with Jake from Economic Pick today, and he shared some good information just about on how crazy housing has kind of gotten over the years, and how but if you actually factor in the change in the size of homes from, in this example on the Humble Dollar article, where the 1950 house had 983 square feet and new houses now have over 2,300 square feet. If you fix for the size increase in houses haven't really on a real basis got that much more expensive. Mm-hmm. It's just they're 3 times the size now, so obviously they're going to be more expensive. So yeah, that was pretty interesting data that he had shared that I had no idea about. But yeah, I think we just, I think level up, every generation tries to level up a little bit and, increase their spending and, try to live a quote unquote better life than, their parents or their grandparents. But, we've talked about this before, like spending your way to happiness probably isn't going to happen, but it's just, you see your neighbors doing it, you see your coworkers doing it, your family doing it. So, I think, and it's just, kind of the American consumer culture where, it's buying new things is kind of, put all over the internet and social media and things like that. So he had actually shared this graph, which we should probably share in the show notes, which is pretty crazy when you look at real spending, over the past 50 years, how much more we spend on recreation and things like that. It's just astronomically more than the couple generations before us who had spent so much less of their actual total spending on recreation, which was pretty interesting. So someone said it was, I think iPhones and Netflix are the cause of
it. So where are you guys at on the housing? Did you guys put it on hold for a little while?
Yeah, we're looking, but supplies not too great right now. So we're just kind of, we got our eyes open, but not moving too fast.
So I wonder if not part of the problem, but what happens for some people is, you guys want a smaller house because that's all you need right now. But eventually you kind of get to the point where you really, really want to have a house, and then you just kind of just throw your hands up and say, all right, we'll buy the big house because that's all that's left. And then now you have a bigger house than you ever wanted.
Yeah, and then I'm trying not to make that decision because then you don't want to regret it, a year down the road or 3 years down the road. So yeah, I'm fine taking our time with this.
All right, the last one has nothing to do with finance, but Avengers came out over the weekend, and I've not seen it yet. I'm disappointed. But the last Avengers Endgame came out, and there's an article in the Wall Street Journal that talks about the stunt doubles and body doubles that are in it and how many there are, which I just thought it was kind of cool. And they're kind of the unsung heroes because they don't make as much money. Their name is just a blip at the very end, but they're doing all of the I would say all of the hard work. I don't know how hard it is to memorize your lines for a movie, but I think all of the physical stuff is actually the hard work and part of what makes the movie so exciting. And they're not even like really getting a lot of credit for it. So I thought it's pretty cool. But I think Avengers did like 2 billion worldwide in the opening weekend.
1.2.
I saw 1.2, but as I was preparing for this, I think they updated the number in the Wall Street Journal and it said 2 billion, which is insane.
Yeah, so Wall Street Journal had the article today that said that they did 1.2 billion, record debut, and then Morgan tweeted like a sentence in here that says, "Well, if you adjust for inflation, Gone with the Wind did 1.8 billion." So he was saying how that doesn't make as good of a headline as record breaking debut, but it's so
Right.
true.
So are you gonna go see it? Are you an Avengers fan?
I know I'm not going to see it.
I never saw an Avengers movie until we had Roman, and we didn't see it until he was older. But then I think we saw Captain America, and then we just got hooked. So we have pretty much all of the movies, and we've seen them all in the theater. So we're gonna go see this. I think they're actually real good. I enjoy them. But I didn't grow up a
Yeah.
comic book kid, but I like them now.
Well, it's probably fun too with the boys. I'm sure they love it. So.
All right, that was it for this week. What do you got for recommendations?
Yeah, so I am reading this book called Endurance: Shackleton's Incredible Voyage by Alfred Lansing. And it's about Shackleton, who is this British explorer and wants to be the first person to reach the South Pole. So he sets off in 1914 to try and do it. And this book has been shared, I think, by like Patrick O'Shaughnessy and a bunch of the Finn Twit. So I finally got around. I'm halfway through, and it's awesome. I'm gonna plow through the rest of it, and I kind of already know how it ends up, but just their whole journey along the way is just crazy. Second recommendation is a podcast, the Winklevoss twins, who ended up suing Zuckerberg because they said they created Facebook, and I think they won somewhere between in the tens of millions of dollars from Zuckerberg in that lawsuit. But they were interviewed by Barry Ritholtz on Masters in Business. I almost skipped the podcast just because I was like, the Winklevoss twins, I don't really care. But then I listened to it, and these guys are pretty involved in investing and just have pretty cool perspective on cryptocurrencies. And I just really enjoyed hearing their story, and they weren't as kind of stuck up as I thought they were going to be.
I didn't have anything special for recommendations, but I am going to second the Masters in Business. I've listened to it twice already. And I'm getting ready to finish a third time because I'm highlighting it for another blog that I write for entrepreneurship, because there's a lot of real good information about being an entrepreneur in there, in addition to the cryptocurrency and Bitcoin stuff. And I'm with you. I thought they would have been real douchey, but they seemed like actually real smart dudes and pretty cool. So I enjoyed it as well. I thought Barry did a good job with it, but there was a lot of real good nuggets in there if you like business and entrepreneurship.
All right. That's all I had this week.
All right. We will be back, a regular Monday release next week. We had Easter 2 weeks ago, and then just crazy Sundays for both of us. So apologize for this being a day late, but we'll be back on schedule next week. So as usual, hit the show notes, ferventfinance.com, allaboutyourbenjamins.com. Leave us some reviews, 5 stars ratings on iTunes and all that good stuff. But thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.
Have a great week.